Everyone, testing 1, 2. Everyone, ah, don't make me carry this all by myself.
Yeah, I mean, Andy's the important one.
Do I just have to repeat everything Julia says? I can hear her.
All right, they should be able to hear me now. I messed around with some stuff, and hopefully, I mean, if they don't hear us, then I'm out of stuff. Got Giuliano. Yes, thank you. All right, we have
Excellent.
confirmed. Because of course we had to have technical issues with an engineer. It's
That's how it always goes.
it has to happen. Just like with if I ever have QA as a guest, we're not going to have any problems because I'm not going to be able to repro anything because unfortunately that's the bane of the community. They bring issues to us and then we're like we can't repro it.
Can't repro it. Can't fix it if I don't know what's happening. I'm sorry.
Apologies for my messy living room, folks. I did not have a chance to really pick up much, so my kid left all her school stuff there. But yes, let's formally start this, and we always start with introductions of who I am. For those of you who don't know me, I am Nitocris or Julia, the community manager for Neverwinter, and I am very pleased to have a guest for the first time of this discipline and the person himself. But I'm going to let him talk about who he is. Who are you, Andy? Reveal yourself to us.
I'm Andy. I am the lead engineer on Neverwinter. I have about 15 years experience as a programmer in the games industry, which always sounds interesting when I have to say that out loud. I've been kind of in a lot of different areas of the games industry. I've worked on City of Heroes, PC MMO. I've worked on Call of Duty. I've worked on some mobile projects as well. I am a giant D&D nerd. I love both playing and DMing. And when I DM, I always come up with the most crazy, ridiculous, big homebrews. And I always do everything myself because I'm very stubborn, and it's glorious.
No. Stop.
Yeah, you never think about that, right? Like a gameplay engineer wants to make up their own D&D things. How does that work? So I was super excited to get to work on Neverwinter because heck yeah, D&D, it's great fun. Love Forgotten Realms. So
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. I mean, and also thank you just for here repping software engineering, just because we do, we name drop the discipline a lot for, well, they're looking into it or they're investigating, and it gets lost in this like unknown of what exactly are you doing? What kind of witchcraft are you doing back there?
sorcery.
But we have a first question already, and I think it's a very important one, and that it says, and it's Trial by Fire says, "Hey Andy, what's your favorite D&D class?" And not in Neverwinter,
My
but
favorite
D&D.
D&D class, Paladin.
I can
I am
see
a
that.
paladin IRL.
I
About
can
half
see
of my
that.
characters are paladins. Although my favorite character is not a paladin, curiously enough.
Who is your favorite character?
My favorite character is the one I'm currently playing. He's an Aarakocra rogue slash fighter by the name of Twigsworth, and
Oh,
he has been just a blast.
awesome.
It's fun to play. Like I am very much like the lawful good paladin most of the time. Like I'm always trying to do the right thing, and it's very much fun to play the anti archetype. I'm just the curious one who gets in all sorts of trouble and just does things constantly and gets everybody. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
You're what's called the, move away from the plot device. So
I am the one that brings the action to the team because everyone starts
nice.
deliberating and I get bored and I'm like I poke the thing. What happens? Let's do this.
Getting some questions about giveaways. So I sent out some of the codes, and then I was waiting for some other people to reply because they hadn't replied with some questions I had to follow up with. And then every now and then the community alias email gets dropped from my Outlook because it happens. And I thought my emails were going out, but they weren't. They're now stuck in the outbox because I checked this morning because I usually check giveaways before I start a stream, just to make sure if I'm going to get people asking why they haven't gotten something. So yes, if you have not gotten something, most likely you were stuck in the outbox. So I'll hit it after this stream. I've actually scheduled time after the stream for giveaways. I've carved out that time just for you folks. So we can now have a Cryptic staff party. Cryptic Wizard, Robert Gutierrez, Andy as Paladin, Julie as a Warlock. So funny enough, in Neverwinter, I love playing Warlock and Wizard, but for tabletop, it's actually Barbarian or Cleric. So, you know, I bring the rage or the healing, depending on the mood I'm in. But let's not deviate too much, as this is going to be a Q&A focused on software engineering. And I suppose before we start taking questions, we should probably define what that is. So, Andy, what do you do?
Well, what I do is sit in meetings all day and talk to people.
What would you do if you weren't a
lead
lead?
But software engineering is the people that write the code that underlies the game. I like to view it as our primary customer are the artists and designers that actually make the game that goes to you. So we are. So I like to think of us as the unsung heroes of game development. We rarely get any credit, but when things go badly, it's usually our fault.
Wait, I thought that was QA.
It's not. QA gets blamed, but it's not their fault.
Oh yeah. So you're saying
but
it
if
is your
things go
fault.
real bad, it's usually our fault.
Though there are people who believe that all you need to develop a game is a programmer. So
I mean, technically, if you just have a programmer, you can make a game. I don't expect the art to be very good.
yeah.
Or it might be some glorious programmer art, depending on what your definition of good is.
That's true.
I have some mean programmer art, let me tell you.
Oh, well, I really need to do an art contest. Like one of our content creators once did a stream where with one of our now a designer, back then producer, and they had to paint on like Microsoft Paint, a little drawing of something, and so it was actually really fun to see comparing the paintings. So I might have to bring people to do that. So get the non-artists on the team to paint something. All right, cool. So I do have some questions that I've lined up, but I said, it's a Q&A. So I want to see what you guys have to say. So you folks have to say. So we do have a question from Jonathan XX. Hi, nice to see you again. I love that you're all in my streams all the time, which is great. And they say, my question for Andy is, what's the best thing you've introduced into Neverwinter? I'm trying to think. It can't be. You can talk about M24, but probably not M25 yet. So I'm gonna limit the scope. I'm gonna limit the scope of that.
Talk about M25 yet. I mean, the most serious answer is that I feel like I've introduced a lot of process into how the engineering team works, and the process has become much more smooth. We're much more. We do like code reviews much more thoroughly than we have in the past, and the way the communication between the Neverwinter engineering team and core engineering and the other Neverwinter departments has improved a lot, and that's been my focus. That is the serious and not fun answer. But the fun answer, like, what's the best thing that I've introduced? I don't actually. Yeah. It's been a while since I've thought about this. I do fix a bunch of random little bugs, the sort of things that are annoying to people, but they're usually not high enough priority to get on anyone else's schedule. But because they're not high priority, it's totally fine for me to do it and then get to it whenever, because it usually takes me like a good couple of weeks to find enough time to put something together and get it in there. Man, what are the things that I've done recently? I mean, I've added a whole bunch of different dev tools to make life easier for the developers.
Mm-hmm. Which
Those
lets us
players are aware of, right?
But it lets us test, like when we do play tests. You've added some stuff that's actually been really useful for play tests, which means that when we do internal play tests, which helps, it makes it's smoother. So in turn, it's going to be a better product when it reaches the players.
Yeah.
But I actually have. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, my focus, at least how I view my job as an engineer, is my job is to make the designers and artists' lives easier, and that they can be more productive and can create cooler, better things, right? Like both more productive and more powerful. So I'd like to think that I'm helping in a lot of the really cool things that you guys are seeing in M24 and have been seeing in the past few modules. But I can't take primary credit for most of that stuff. So.
I mean, as someone who's done both community and now production, not taking primary credit is something, I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I also see a lot of like the value that you've brought. I can give an example, which is you actually listen. That is something you've brought to the game. You listen. You've actually reached out to me. You've worked with me. Where that's from a community manager standpoint, that's invaluable because it affects the community as well. I can give them answers. I can go to them and say, hey, or I can honestly say, hey, this is where we are in the investigation process. But little things like this actually, so folks won't have seen this. For those folks who have been trying M24 or North Dark Reaches, we've actually announced the official module title. North Dark Reaches on preview. Yeah, we mentioned that we announced it last week, Thursday, and it's coming out November 8th on all platforms. But in North Dark Reaches, on the Mimic server or the preview server, you probably haven't seen it because all we've done is test ones, or temporarily we did a few live ones. But there is a feature which is called in-game news messaging. And what it is for those of you who don't follow social media or forums as religiously, sometimes there are emergency issues that come up, like something is bugged, or we're aware of something really important, and we want to message it out and make sure that as many people as possible see it. So to capture that group of folks who don't use social media and forums as much, we will have a little in the landing page, which is like the page when first opens up when you get the game, which is all the news and the ads and stuff. It's going to be a little section when there is a message. There'll be a little section in the corner that has whatever emergency messaging we put out. Now, where does Andy come in this? Even though there were other people who did the actual work and implementation, Andy was there to make sure that there was time. People had the information they needed. Basically, just making sure making sure things got done. So that is really helpful, and that is going to directly impact the community. So that that's the kind of stuff that you provide that I still think is great. Which and then there's other areas of the game, of course, that he's touched, but I'm only focused on the stuff that I'm going to be using, which is messaging.
I mean, that's the most important part, right?
Of course, yeah. We had another question from, let's see, Mirage. Sorry, I was like, M1 Rag 3. Mirage, yes, okay. I can read. I can read lead speak. Andy, what thing would you wish to implement in Neverwinter from the software side, yet due to certain limitations you can't do at least now? And what may we expect in the future?
I mean,
if you can only answer half
of
that,
that's
fine.
Things like that I could be here for a good long while and rant about all the different things that I'd love to do if I had the time. Let's see, what's one thing in specific? I know one of the things that I think is really important for the game is that we need to be better about understanding the performance profiles of the content that we create. We have some tooling, and we do. And sorry, when I say performance profiles, the frame rates and like the memory usage and that sort of stuff, and looking for like spikes in your in how long it takes for a frame to render. So we want the game to be at 60 FPS on a good computer, on a good PC in particular at all times. But then due to the way that certain art assets are built, sometimes when you have that asset on screen, your frame rate will drop from 30 to 40 or 20, or if it gets really bad, 10. It can go down depending on how crazy the artist scale. It can get real bad. But we have some tooling that helps with there. But one thing that I've really wanted to do, and we've just never been able to find been able to get enough time to prioritize it, is to really come to understand that tooling and build it better into our process, so we can continue to create content that looks as good as what we do now, but make sure it's more performant and doesn't cause these weird issues with people's frame rates in certain different little parts. So that's definitely something I really want to have happen, and I've been trying to find the time for that for over a year now, and it never quite makes the priority list. So we'll see.
Yeah.
I really hope we can get to it in the future.
That'd be awesome. Let's see. Oh, okay. So there's other questions that are coming in that are not software, just like software. So I'm going to try to keep that focused. If I can later on, I'll try to address them either through Twitter or towards the end. But I did want to hit some topics and kind of talking about more about like things that you've done, or not just you, but the whole like software team. I'll give an example of so the Masquerade of Liars. A lot of players have, or not a lot. I don't know the full number yet, but some players have encountered the fact that they can't use the Masquerade currency to purchase Masquerade items. Now, I did want to let the community know right now that I got confirmation this morning that we'll be extending the last chance vendor by 1 week. So you will have time, because we also plan on hopefully fixing it before. But yes. So my question is,
one of
like,
our engineers is actively researching that problem and figuring out exactly what needs to be done to get it fixed. And we're still hoping to get that fixed live, both while Masquerade is running.
Yeah, or throughout the last chance vendor. We will find a way to give a chance for players to purchase items with the Masquerade currency. So
yes,
just wanted to reassure that.
We're hoping for a little more. I can't guarantee it. We're hoping for it. One of the things about programming is it's always complicated. It's always way more complicated than it seems at first glance. So this one in particular, what happened was we were making some changes a few months ago to related to the inventory improvements that's public, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And there was a lot of underlying refactor to the way the code works to make it more efficient, which allowed us to do more things with it than we could have done in the past. And in refactors, like we rewrote the system as it was. We changed the way it processed some data in ways that allowed it to go more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The code didn't take as long to run. And then that gave us more resources that we could do new and cool things with. Mm-hmm. And part of that refactor is we changed the way a decent amount of the items work under the hood. And we spent a bunch of time scouring the code and trying to understand all of the different edge cases and all of the different behaviors that certain items had. And we thought we caught everything, and we didn't. There were a few things that got through, and this is one of them, in that the Masquerade currency has some particular technical details about how it was implemented that make it unique compared to any other item in the game that we had found, and we just hadn't found this particular unique functionality when we went live with the first that refactor for the improvements. So unfortunately, we've had to find the time to fix that now that after it's live, which is a bummer. And then it turns out it wasn't just a bug. Like, there was, because we had missed this particular detail, we had to communicate with other parts of the team. It's like, oh, hey, this is how this thing works. How do we want to solve it? There's this solution, there's that solution, there's maybe a third solution we could maybe think about. We had to have a conversation about the benefits and drawbacks of the different solutions, and then we chose which one we wanted to do, and we have that answer now, and we're working through getting that done. But we're all humans underneath the hood. There's people here that's doing all this work, and it just takes time to manage these conversations. So it takes a few hours to get everyone together to have the conversation, and then a couple hours later you figure out the details, and the time adds up, right? So we've been aware of this, and we've had a reasonably good understanding of the problem for at least a few days now, and we're still now working on the fix, and we'll probably have the fix within probably within a day or so. But even once we have that fix, then we have to get it through the build and get it tested and then get it live, right? So there's a lot of little steps between we found out a problem and the fix goes live, and that just naturally tends to take more time. And then, because it's always complicated, I think that's the number one rule. There's also, we've got, I don't even know, 3 or 4 different builds that are all in flight for different things. like we've got the live build, we've got the build that's going to go live for M24 on the 8th. We've got build X, which is the thing that I can't talk about. We've got build Y, which is the thing that we can't talk about. And like all of those things are on the same people and like interfere with each other, and we have to make sure we are keeping all of those builds organized properly, and we don't accidentally put the wrong thing in the wrong place and release something that's broken. So it's just complicated. It's it's unfortunate, but that's kind of the way that works. So we're still really trying to get this live as quickly as we can, and it's going to take a little bit. And worst case scenario, even if we can't get it live, as Julia said, we do have another workaround to make sure that people can still get their items.
Yeah. Some great questions have also continued to come in. So let's see. I'll give someone else a chance first. Let's see. F. Seixas. I kind of want to pronounce your X in a different way, but so thank you. Sorry for butchering your name, but they asked, since you deal with people coding, how difficult is it to understand someone's logic when they leave? Do you have some standardization in terms of writing?
So I'm guessing, we're not. Yeah, so it's like understanding someone else's code, right? Mm-hmm. We do have some formal code standards, like put these symbols in this way, please, put breaks in it this way, organize everything so it looks, reasonably similar, and that does help. And you can get programmers into some fun fights if you start arguing over which way your code formatting is best, but we're not going to go there right now. But a lot of coming to understand other people's code, it's a skill that you learn as you program. I've been doing this for a while now, and at this point I've seen enough code and discussed it with enough people that I can usually understand things pretty well. But one of the things that that the team has been doing, and we've been doing more of with me as the lead, is the code reviews. I think I mentioned this earlier. Mm-hmm. And how code reviews work is, somebody writes up some code and you're like, I'm pretty sure I fixed bug X, and then you put it up on an internal server, and someone else can go look at it, right? So I spend a lot of my time reviewing other people's code, and I read the code, and we have a discussion about it, right? It's like, why did you do X? I don't think I would have put this code here. I think I would have done it this other way. But we're all professionals here. We've all been doing this for a while. Like, they probably had a good reason. They're not wrong necessarily. People do have bugs too, but oftentimes when it comes to like understanding code, it's just thinking through it and then having a conversation with them. And after a while, part of it, like if you're working with somebody, you'll get an understanding for how that person works, and you'll have that understanding. It's more interesting when you're looking at code that was written decades ago by a person you've never met. I like to call that some code archaeology right there, as you're digging through the past. That one can be more difficult because you don't have anyone to ask. But as you, it's hard to say exactly how that skill gets developed, but you do it. I've been reading other people's code for over a decade now, and as you do it more and more, you come to understand how that works. One thing that's very useful, which not all engineers use, is with any version control program has the ability. Version control programs, when you're making changes, you check in the code into a version control program like Subversion or Perforce. What it does is it keeps track of the history of how the code has ever looked. You can use those tools to then like look at the specific file you're looking at. And it's like, well, why is this line of code the way it is? And then those tools will say, hey, this line of code was written by this person on this date, and this is the comment they wrote when they wrote it. So if you're diligent about writing good comments, then future you will be happy, because when you go back and look at your code in a year and not remember what you were doing, that comment will help illuminate what was going on. So yeah, those are all a bunch of different tools that kind of help in learning to read other people's code.
Cool. So someone noticed something I did intentionally, which is there's a typo in my title because I wanted to see who brought it up. And it was because I hadn't planned any formalized giveaways into like MOOBA and stuff today, but I do like to give some stuff out. And in the past, people would mention promissory note, like whoever the first one to mention that would get a prize. So even though they were being snarky about it, let's see, the Bandit Gaming. It looks like they were the first time to notice it. You notice the trick, so you get a treat. So go ahead and email community@crypticstudios.com. Again, it's community@crypticstudios.com to let me know what platform you play on so I can give you a treat. So, but yeah, I do things intentionally most of the time, unless it's an accident. But Andy,
Everyone has accidents. That's why code reviews are good.
mhm.
I do it too. I make mistakes. We're all human.
But so what you were talking about, like, code review, but what about things like when programmers, engineers have to work with other disciplines, so like designers or artists, and basically interpreting, taking what they're designing and turning it into code. Like, is that like a lengthier process, or by now do you kind of have like a way, you kind of have a template for how you do it? Yeah, basically when an artist or a designer says, we want this amazing thing to happen without it breaking the game, like what goes through a programmer? What goes through your
Artists and
mind?
designers rarely have that last part. Usually that's the job of the engineer to make sure it doesn't break the game.
Mm-hmm.
The artists and designers want to do the really cool thing. And I kid.
Oh no,
Um,
we
but yeah,
we get
so
excited about things, but don't think of the repercussions. So.
and that's fine. We need people to push creative boundaries and do the awesome stuff, right? Like engineers are an essential part of the game, but they will not make a good game on their own. To the comment earlier, if you could technically make a game with just an engineer, yeah, you could. But yeah, learning how to work with artists and designers is another skill that you build, honestly, professionally. It's far more important than a lot of engineers credit it to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's just those people skills of being able to work with somebody, and in particular for a gameplay engineer. So to step back real quick for context on that, there's a lot of different sub-disciplines of engineers that work in gaming. Gameplay engineers, which I am one of, we are the sub-discipline that works most closely with the artists and designers, in the designers really, and we work very hand in hand to make sure the specifics of the game get implemented properly. Whereas there are other disciplines of engineers like graphics engineers or physics engineers or network engineers, which all do absolutely essential work, but that work tends to be more distanced from non-technical people. So for those people, they don't necessarily need to have those abilities to work with non-technical people. It's a skill I've learned the hard way over the years. I have definitely made my mistakes and angered some people in the past, which is not great. But as you do it, you learn how to speak to someone that doesn't have the same technical mindset of an engineer. Some artists and designers do have a technical mindset, and that's great. Then we can both throw ones and zeros at each other, and we can speak in the native language, and everything's good. But normally we have to translate it out into things like English.
Mostly.
One of the things that I found is absolutely essential when you're working with non-technical people is they will very often come to you and say, "Hey, do this technical thing," and then the sort of the I don't know, naive, probably a good word for it. The naive reaction to that, it's like, that's not going to work because there's this, there's that, there's this. I understand the code. You can't do it this way, and you just get this very negative, like, no, and that's not the correct way to do that. What an engineer should be doing is like, okay, I hear what you're saying. What you're saying isn't technically feasible, but I'm going to take that information and step back a second. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want? What is the problem you need solved? Oh, okay. And then we have that conversation where you explain what the problem is or what cool new thing you're trying to do is. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I have the technical understanding of the systems that need to be adapted to achieve what you're trying to do. And with that technical understanding, it's like, okay, I understand, if I change this thing and that thing, then I think it'll work the way that you want it to do. And I'll sort of I'll try to rephrase what they're saying from my perspective, and the words that I'm using are a little more technically. I try not to be technically complex, but like technically correct in that because I have the understanding of the code and they don't, and that's fine. They're not supposed to know the code. That's not their job. Nothing wrong with that. I will try to rephrase the thing, and it's like, is this what you are saying? And they'll say, yeah, that sounds right. Or no, I don't think that's right because there's this other thing that I want. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that when you explained it the first time. Let me take a second to think it through. You have that back and forth conversation, and usually you'll come to an agreement, or sometimes you'll just get to the, hey man, I'm sorry, the thing you want to do is it's literally not technically feasible. We can't do the thing you want to do, and here's some reasoning why we want to do that. But it's rare that anything gets to completely technically infeasible. And then you implement the thing and you hand it to them and you say, hey, here's the thing that I think does what you wanted it to do. Try it out. Try to do the thing you wanted to do. Let me know if this does or doesn't solve your need. If it doesn't, come back to me and we'll work on it, right? And when you're first starting out, you're going to get that wrong more often than you're going to get it right. But as you do it more and more over the years, you get better at understanding those needs, and the first time is more correct more often.
Cool. You actually mentioned something about things when they're not technically possible, which kind of ties a little bit into another question we got from Ketov, KET0TH. They asked, some time ago it was mentioned that Stronghold systems would get some updates, but it was mentioned that there are some obstacles regarding the current implementation. Are those obstacles technical, or are they design? Or are they both?
A little bit of A, a little bit of B.
Okay.
So I'd say, to be completely honest, the first and biggest obstacle is it's a production problem. It's a matter of, like, can we find the resources to invest into this system, and is it more important than the other things we could invest that time into, right? Like, just the reality of game development is that we only have so much time, we only have so many people, and we can only get so much done. And it drives every single one of us a little crazy that we can't do all of the things we really want to do. And Stronghold sometimes has had that, like, sometimes it loses it. Well, it has always lost that fight. Sometimes it only barely loses that fight, and sometimes it loses that fight a little harder than others. It is still on our radar for, like, we really would like to come back and fix this system. There's a lot going on, and then the other half of that is the technical burden of the system. So I was not on the project when Strongholds were written, so I can only sort of give secondhand information from my understanding of that system. But from my understanding of that system is it was never it was implemented. Excuse me. It was implemented under a very tight timeline, which means that a lot of decisions had to be made that sort of compromised the long-term robustness is the technical term for it. I'm trying to think of a less technical term for it, but the long-term viability of the code. Viability isn't the right word. The ability to extend it, the extensibility of the code. So it does exactly what it does, but it's hard to add to it.
Okay.
And that's just is what happens when you try to do a big feature and you don't give it enough time. And I can't speak to why that happened, and I am not trying to throw anyone under the bus on that. That's just, it is what it is, right? It was a big feature and it had a smaller timetable, and they got it done. But that leads it to be harder to adapt, and then the way that design has to interact with that system, it's also hard for them to add stuff. So it's both technically and designically. There's got to be a better word than that. But for design, it's also difficult for them. So it's difficult to want to invest a lot of time on design's end to add things to that system because of how difficult it is technically. But then technically, it's also difficult. So, like, finding the time to fix that is also hard, right? So there's a lot of things sort of stacked up against it, which is why it doesn't tend to win the priority fights, unfortunately. But yeah, it probably it would at the very least need an engineer to spend some time to. Oh, and then another thing is that the people that wrote it aren't here anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we don't have the internal knowledge of how the system works. So you'd have to have an engineer sit down with the code and really thoroughly learn it and understand how it works,
Mm-hmm.
and then be able to make informed opinions about this is how we would work with this in the future. Maybe this part of the code we just have to completely throw it away and rewrite it because it's not flexible and not extensible. But this other part of the code, it looks good, but there's a few improvements we would need to make. And then it's like, oh, this part's great. We just need to add a couple of bits to it, right? Like, I can't make that assessment because I haven't had the time to sit down and read the code, but that would be the first step. And then after we've done that, which is in and of itself a pretty significant investment of time, then we can actually make decisions about like how we would move forward with strongholds in the future. So we get it. Like I'm pretty sure every single person on the leadership team is annoyed that we haven't been able to support this system as properly as we would want to. And sometimes that's just reality. I hate to say it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No,
but,
it's
we haven't forgotten.
Yeah.
I can tell you that we haven't forgotten. Every time we talk about long-term planning for Neverwinter, it always comes up as man, I really wish we could do something with strongholds. And it's like, we look at it and it's like, well, it's strongholds, or we could do this other cool thing that I can't talk about. And it's like, well, we know we can. That other cool thing is also awesome, and we know that we can tackle that without having to make this big investment into tech. So maybe we don't do it right now, and maybe we come back to strongholds later.
Yeah. No, I think the community has heard me talk about strongholds and always the answer is just it's finding time for it. So but thank you for thank you for the detailed explanation. I think they probably got more context from you than they've ever gotten from me. And I do want to go.
I have the power.
You too. You have the knowledge. I do want to go back to something you said, but I also want to squeeze in another question from Arazith, which is any plans to make the new lighting in the new upcoming Underdark areas apply to the whole game? You want to talk about that?
We would love to, but it's another one of those. We only have so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
It's a significant investment of time on our environment artists to go back and relight things, and it's awesome. Like the new lighting system is amazing. I love it. I am not an art person. Like it's just not it's not my thing. Like I'm much more of like a get into the rules of a game, like the nitty gritty design stuff. That I love that stuff, but I love the new lighting system. It's so pretty. I love everything I've seen with the new environment. It's great. We definitely want to, and I can't speak to whether we will or will not in the future. But in theory, it's a feature that has to fight with other features like everything else, and we have a certain amount of time that we're relatively certain we understand how much work it takes to go back and change an old zone to the new system. So it's a matter of, okay, well, do we have X amount of time on one of the environment artists that we can dedicate to go back and do that? And if that's the case, then which zone do we do, right? Like we have some ideas for some zones that we really want to hit. And then, if that happens, then it gets scheduled and it goes out with a module, right? It's definitely something we're looking at. I definitely will neither confirm nor deny as to whether we are or are not going to be doing it in the future, because I have to be careful with those things. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. And then kind of going back to like knowledge, especially from like people who've left and stuff, which requires documentation. So Huston one says, as a software engineer, my question has to do with documentation. How much time do you spend on it? For instance, one of the major problems with the Foundry was that its internal workings was undocumented. So
I can't speak to the Foundry. That was long gone before I got here, so I won't use that as a specific example. Documentation is one of those very interesting details. There are certain types of documentation that I think are invaluable, and certain types of documentation that I think tend to be a waste of time. So in my personal opinion, most you're a software engineer, so I'm going to talk to you as a software engineer. Most comments, like / comments, tend to be a waste of time. There are sort of different questions you can answer with comments. You can have like, what is this code doing? That comment is almost always a waste of time. You should be writing the code with clear names for variables and functions, etc., such that the code self-documents and it's clear what the code is doing from reading the code itself. There's how, like, how is this code achieving the thing you want to do? Sometimes that is a useful comment to write, because every once in a while you do have to write complex, dense code that isn't easy to understand on its own. But the vast majority of the time, you should take the time when you're writing your code such that it's easy to read how it's doing what it's trying to do by reading the code itself. Both of those things are necessary because comments always rot immediately. Like they tend to get lost. Like if you're copy pasting code around, sometimes comments don't come with them, or people will change the code and won't remember to change the comment. So just as a rule, they almost never keep up with the code, whereas the code by definition is always going to be up to date. If it doesn't run, right? But then on the other hand, why comments are awesome. Like, why did you, the engineer, choose to implement this the way you did? There's this other way you could have done it, but you say, oh, I didn't write it this way because it doesn't interact well with this code and this other thing over here, so I chose to implement this thing. It's like, that's awesome. That is super useful context when I go back and look at code that was written a year ago, and like, I look at something, it's like, this looks like nonsense. Like, why would you ever possibly write this code this way? And it's like, oh, and then there's this comment on it. It's like, I understand this looks weird, but here's why. It's like, oh, thank you. Thank you past me for writing a good comment so future me understands what's going on. On the other hand, I am fair. These are my personal opinions. Not all engineers agree with them. So take that for what you will. But I am a very strong advocate for version control comments, as I mentioned earlier. I think that having an understanding of the history of your code, like, any given file, it's version 1, you change it, it's version 2, version 3, etc. Like, understanding why you made all the changes you make is essential. And I think that subversion comments tend to have that kind of context in them that you don't get in comments that are directly embedded in your code. So those are two examples. There's all sorts of other types of documentation. I think I could rant about documentation for this entire stream if you wanted, but I think those are a couple of good examples.
Yeah, no, they were. By the way, you are now dubbed Andy CIA Agent Maurer. I'm sorry. I cannot confirm or deny.
Or flower.
Yeah. I always want to give it an extra, I don't know, like, yeah.
It's one of the few silent R's in the English language, so
yeah.
I don't. Yeah. You're not the only person who's ever mispronounced my name.
Yeah, as someone who, before I got married, people would mispronounce my last name too. I feel bad when I do it to others. Let's see. There are other questions that I'm asking some people to repeat, so I'm going to insert one I had backed up, which was so in September we released a new code branch. And there were issues. So this is a two-parter. First, like, what is a code branch, if you can kind of quickly define it? And two, why were there so many issues?
Well, question one is a much easier question to answer, so I'll start there. So from kind of stepping back to the 10,000-foot view, Neverwinter has two major parts to its guts, like the files that you create that make the game, right? There's the code, which is written by the engineers, and then there's the data, which is like the defs that create the powers or the the meshes that create the 3D models that you see in the game, all of that stuff. The way that it works is they tend to be pretty separate, and so then the data is all the fun stuff that is much more player facing, and I'm going to set that aside for a second. And then the code is the thing that the engineers work with, and the code does all sorts of important things that most players aren't. The new lighting system, for example, that is a player facing thing. There is a completely different set of code underneath the hood. So, for example, sorry, let me step back a second. There are two different groups of engineers, and for this, there's the game team, which are engineers that are specifically assigned to Neverwinter that write Neverwinter code, and then there's core, and core writes all of the stuff that isn't specific to a game. So like the lighting system, for example, was written by core because that same lighting system is used by both Neverwinter and Star Trek Online. So they do their work and we do our work, and there's a lot of work that comes to that. So one of the changes that I've been advocating for since I got here a year and a half ago was to try to reduce the risk that happens with our module launches by taking all of the core changes that are made by the core engineering team and releasing them as at a separate time from our modules. And that release that was in September was the first time that we've executed on that. So we took the risk from that is inherently involved in making big changes to the underlying code, and had it happen without a module. So there won't be anywhere near as many code changes that go live with the module on November 8th. So we're far less likely to see issues. I mean, it's not zero, but we're less likely to see issues then, because hopefully we've already gotten through that, right? So that is why the code branch release was a separate thing. As for the specifics about why we had difficulties, that is a very complicated topic. But ultimately what it comes down to is the core engineering team is always working on fairly large projects that involve rewriting significant parts of the code. And those large projects have a lot of long-term value in that they let us get a lot of cool things like the new lighting system, right? Like we can do really awesome new lighting and it looks great, but we invested a lot of time from core engineering and we had to deal with a lot of issues with that. And there was a lot of back and forth between engineering and the environment artists to make sure that it worked out well, and the effects artists as well. So there are similar features. I'm not going to get into the details of all of them right now, that were part of this code release, and they're big important things that will get us value in the long term. But the problem with changing a lot of code is you changed a lot of things, you touched a lot of stuff, and it can have impact. Like when it's this low level of code, this is the sort of thing that can impact anything in the game. So we spent a long time being very diligent to try to find all of the issues we could find. We tested things on all the different platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and we looked at things from every different angle we could think of. But in the end, what it comes down to is the same thing I said before. We're all human. There's only so much time in the day. And we do need to eventually ship things. We were pretty confident that we found all the issues. We recognized it was almost certain that we were wrong. Like I knew when we were shipping it, I was like, it's almost guaranteed that there's going to be something that we're going to have to adapt to. Like
I don't think there's ever a zero chance for bugs. Like I've worked in this industry for a long time and I've never seen zero bugs. Like
well, and the thing is, like, if it's an art bug, okay, the new enemy looks a little funky, and when it's a code bug, a whole bunch of people crash and can't play the game. Unfortunately, it's way more visible when engineering does something wrong than when an artist or a designer does something wrong. Right, just inherent to the nature of the work. So yeah, we spent a bunch of time, but we knew there were probably going to be some issues. We were really hoping they weren't going to be as big as they were, and unfortunately, they ended up being as big as they were. But we were aware of it as soon as it happened. We had all the correct resources on it, and we were working through it. And coming back to the earlier part of the conversation, is it just takes time. Like there's just a non-zero amount of time from we push the thing live, and then it starts happening to players, and then enough players see it that it gets notified in a way that we would see it, because like these issues impacted a lot of people. That's true, but like in terms of percentage, it was like we're talking like 1% of players, right? It's one of the amazing and terrifying things about game development is it's usually like within 24 hours of a patch going live, you guys have already tested it way more than the development team has had a chance to look at it, right? So by the time 3 days comes around, you guys have had 10 times as much just hours logged. Excuse me. And it's on all different types of PCs that we don't have, with all different types of video cards and drivers and and network connections and all of those variables that just happen out in the real world. We try real hard to capture as many as we can. We're not going to get all of them. So to us, it's like, oh man, this thing and this thing and this thing and that thing all had to coincide to make this crash happen. Well, there's no way we're going to find that, and then that happens to like 1,000 people, and it's like, okay, well, that was a lot of people, and it sucks for the people that it happens to. I'm not trying to say that your experience is wrong or anything. We absolutely wish that it didn't happen. It's just I don't know, it's reality, right? So yeah, but there's that time, like as soon as community was aware of it, like the leadership, we were on top of it immediately. I got that information triaged out to the engineers who knew those systems immediately. They jumped on it as quickly as they could. Like there was one particular issue that the engineer who wrote it and who is like the expert in that system, it took that person like 3 or 4 days of like solid like 8 to 10 hour days of working to understand what was going on, because it was this really detailed interaction between like 3 different systems, and like it didn't look like it was obvious it was going to happen, but it accidentally did for a significant portion of the population, and it sucks. It's but that's engineering sometimes, right? Like or at least it's programming. There's my brother is a mechanical engineer, and he oftentimes says that we're not real engineers because we don't necessarily do as thorough of testing as you do with real things. Like he makes like real engines for, you know, like tractors and stuff, right? Like, so if there's a bug in your engine, that's real bad. If there's a bug in a video game, like, you know, no one's gonna get hurt. So there's a little bit of that, and you know, it's I feel I'm definitely rambling on this one because it's a very complex topic, right?
Yeah,
and the thing I'm about to say is it's that trade-off, right? It's like we definitely could take a lot more resources and be much more thorough with our testing, and there'd be far fewer of these issues. But then on the other hand, we would get far less of the cool things out, right? So we try to find that good balance where we don't have the big issues that are going to impact people, and we still get a bunch of cool things out to the players as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
And, you know,
yeah, and
I mean, you should see all of the issues we find internally.
Yeah.
We do find a lot of problems internally and get them fixed before they ever get to you guys.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff.
And it's just, it's the reality, right? No one's perfect. We're all human.
Sorry. Well, not me, but you know, I'm superhuman.
Oh yeah, I mean, some of us engineers are Cylons, but we're not allowed to say that. So.
No, the reason I worded it the way I worded it with like lost so many bugs is because that, and from a player perception, that's what they see. They're like, there's so many bugs because they don't realize everything that has gone well, because they don't know the depth of code since it's not always public facing. But there are a few minutes left, but there's a couple things I want to touch upon, and I did promise in chat I would talk about this. I was getting questions about a couple weeks ago, I through one of our content creators, I put out a request for Xbox players for a preview, like a preview server that would be kind of more like what Mimic is to PC, because up until now we haven't had a test server for console, like a public-facing one. And the reason I didn't put out the call myself was because I needed to minimize how much traffic I got. I also wanted to target directly Xbox players. So I reached out to one of my contacts, and you know, she has that, you know, that the pulse on Xbox community as well, and you know, she gave me the initial list of people who wanted to participate. It was a pretty extensive list, but that does not mean it's going to be just set to that. We are still exploring this. We're still seeing how we can get this happen. I mean, we set things in motion, but it's going to have to be us applying. It's not like a PC where in Mimic where people can just go in and copy their character and start playing. This will be us having to basically give access to these players. So that list might grow. It's just something we're taking slowly. We don't want to, you know, mess it up. And PlayStation players who are asking about it, you know, we have started that conversation as well. And so it's going to be a very similar thing about how we target that initial list of players. But that does not mean we're not going to have more in the future. It's just I want to start slow, because if I didn't, it would have been a little too overwhelming for me to manage. I mean, as it is, that initial list that we got, it was pretty extensive, and I'm having to go through all the gamer tags and identify them. And if folks haven't, like, for example, linked their console account with Arc, it's even trickier to locate them, you know, in our database and find their account information. So it's a long process, but it was definitely legit. You know, apologize for how it, like, there was no big announcement, but that was done on purpose to minimize how much traffic. But I had meant to speak about this, but I hadn't had any streams in between that and this. So thank you for asking, and thank you for those who just kind of kept insisting that they really need an answer. So it's a legit concern.
And I'm very excited that we have that Xbox beta shard. it will help us catch all of those issues that I mentioned earlier, where it's the different scenarios and different players looking at it with different accounts, and we'll find a lot more of those issues on that beta shard, and we'll get them fixed before they go live. So I'm very excited, and we've been working on that for a while. Kind of again to re-implement or to reinforce that it's complicated through line for this conversation. We've been working on that shard for like 3 months at least. I think we started talking about it like 5 months ago was when we were talking about it as a leadership team, and we're like, yeah, we really would like to get this to happen, and then core engineering like really figured out and how to make that work with our publisher and with Microsoft and Sony and all of the different people that had to get together, and it's way more complicated than you'd think it would be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's just how it goes sometimes.
That's
It'd be nice if things are simple. It'd make my life a lot easier.
It'd make things faster, but which speaking of simple things like rollbacks, rolling back an update. I know that for PC, it's more feasible to roll back an update, but for console, it's not, and that's just because we're working with third-party partners. Builds have to go through certification. Rolling back, like what is the impact of that on the console? So. Rolling back an update is not as simple as it might sound. Like you can't just hit the rewind button. Because that
rewind buttons are really, really, really hard to implement.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. It's just really, 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 really hard.
All right. So last, I'm going to sneak in one last question about software, which is where is it? Do you devise your own test? Do you do white box testing and let someone else do black box testing?
Yes, an engineer absolutely should be testing their own code. If they are not testing their code, they are doing it wrong. But yeah, we tend to look at the engineer tends to do the white box testing. It's probably not as formal as you might think of with white box testing. It's not about necessarily like writing a bunch of test scripts out that you can execute at any time. I really wish we had time to do that, but it's one of those. It's again, it's that trade-off thing, right? We can invest a bunch of time in that, but then we get far less output, and we try to find that good balance. And we've been doing some related. I'm rambling again. We've been doing some related stuff with automated testing that's going to help us find some stuff. But now trying to get back to your initial comment, and then the black box testing generally tends to be the dominion of QA. That's our QA folks understand the game from a player's perspective far better than I do, because my perspective is from the code, right, and the artist's perspective is from the art. So we leverage that expertise, and they will find the ways that the code that we wrote interacts with other systems far better than we will. But the engineer definitely needs to do some testing.
No, thank you. And we are at time. People have been asking about giveaways. There's no giveaways today other than the trick that people found in the typo, which, by the way, I had the correct one waiting in the wings. So, but I am hoping to do a stream, an informal stream on Monday. It's Halloween. I want to play for some masquerade content. If I can get away with wearing my costume, I'll do it. So there'll be giveaways then, because it'll just be one of those casual, fun, let's hang out, be spooky together streams. So yeah, there'll be giveaways then. But I did want to say thank you, Andy. It was great to hear that perspective. I learned new things. I'm hoping our players found value. It seems like from the comments, a lot of them were like, that's good to have that perspective, that understanding. So thank you for being here. And
you're very welcome. You're all very welcome. Every single one of us on the dev team care a lot about the players of our game. Like, we are here to help make sure you have fun. And it's, the interaction between players and devs can always be a difficult one. And I hope that sharing some perspective helps bring understanding a little bit between the two sides, so we can, kumbaya and all that.
Yes, lots of thank yous for being so thorough and your comments. So again, Andy, thank you, and I will see you in meetings. I'm sure we have meetings together today.
I'll see you around.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Right.
As always, stay safe. Take care. Bye.